But I'm not. And the reason why, and I explain this to them, and I explain it to everyone else too, is because we're not talking about marriage. We're talking about what the state recognizes as a civil union, and they call it whatever they want. But it's simply what the state recognizes as a civil union. Marriage, true marriage, real marriage, is a spiritual thing. Not necessarily religious, but still spiritual. It's a spiritual union. It's when you and someone else bind together in a spiritual fashion. That's marriage. And you don't need a piece of paper from the state of wherever you're living to tell you you're married. You don't. The government has no role there. And for the folks that constantly scream separation of church and state, separation of church and state, which, by the way, is nowhere in the Constitution. Excuse me. I mean, the closest thing you get is the First Amendment, where it says, Congress shall pass no law in establishment of a religion, meaning essentially you're free to worship as you choose, which also, by the way, just FYI, if you bothered to read the Federalist Papers, you realize that they were really only talking about different denominations of Christianity, but we have expanded that and made it free to all religions, not just branches of Christianity. And that's fine. I mean, I'm cool with that. You know, it's okay. Should it be just different denominations of Christianity? No. No, it really shouldn't be. It should actually be a religion, though. Not just a cult. Certainly not a death cult that the only way to guarantee your trip into heaven is to die as a martyr. That's not a religion. But that's another story. The government has no role in marriage, period. That being the case, we're not talking about marriage. They want to use the word marriage, and the state has every right to determine what it's going to recognize as this civil union because it's affording you benefits. There are certain advantages, then there are certain disadvantages also, whether you're looking at tax purposes or whatever, but there are certain things that are nice if the state recognizes, hey, you two are a legal binding couple. You have created a partnership in a home fashion. Okay, and the state recognizes that. That's all we're talking about here. So we're not talking about actual marriage. Now, don't get me wrong. The folks that are out here, the culture warriors that are fighting to try and defend traditional marriage and keeping it defined this way in a biblical sense, I understand what they're trying to do. And I applaud them for taking their stand and putting so much time, energy, and effort into it. I do. I understand their argument. I applaud them. But at the same time, I keep trying to say that you're trying to protect the country from falling into the complete and total debauchery that we saw in the Roman Empire in the decades leading up to its demise. That's a fight worth fighting. I mean, if you really take a look and dig into the history and see the things that were going on in Rome in, the 10 to 15 years before the empire finally fell, the similarities between then and what's happening here now would probably be frightening if you really dug into it. That is, if you cared. Unfortunately, there's way too many people in the United States that don't care. The part that aggravates me the most, though, and I'm sure, if you stop and think about it, it might bug you a little bit too. The part that bothers me the most about this is the people on the left. Number one, there's a ton of people lying about what this law says and does. At no point in time will you be able to be denied service going into a restaurant. It's not a green light to discriminate. Your definition of discrimination needs to be adjusted if you think that somebody doesn't have the right to tell you, I'm not going to do business with you for a specific purpose, though. Private businesses have the rights to decide who they're going to do business with. If they choose to practice a discriminatory practice, that's wrong. But if they're choosing to follow a religious belief, then I'm not qualified to judge what is and is not wrong. But I am qualified to tell you this, that their right to religious freedom is equal to your right to receive services and goods. Your right to pursue happiness is equal to their right to pursue happiness. And in their case, they're pursuing happiness through the goals of trying to live the principles of their faith. Guys, if you're part of the left and you're one of these people that's been screaming for the last 2 decades about how the Republicans and the conservatives and the people on the right, you don't have the right to force your moral values and your moral judgments on anybody else, then you've got to see where this is pure hypocrisy, because what you're doing is the exact same thing that you said they couldn't do. Now, through these actions, you're trying to force your moral values, your moral precepts on someone else who has a different faith set. You don't have that right any more than they had that right. Here in the United States, thanks to the Constitution, nobody has the right to force anybody else into believing exactly the way they do. Isn't the left the party of diversity? Isn't that what they claim? Well, if you really are about diversity, you should be about accepting the simple fact that we are different. People are different. Embrace the difference. Stop trying to force me into thinking like you do. It's not going to happen, first of all, in my case. But you can't be punitive to people because they don't agree with you. I mean, unless, of course, you're Lois Lerner and you work for the IRS. But then technically you're not supposed to be doing it there either. If you really believe in diversity, then you embrace diversity. That means there's going to be differences. Stop trying to make everybody think and feel exactly the way you do. That's not diversity. You claim to be supporting diversity and you're really supporting uniformity. You claim to be fighting for the rights of an individual while you're trying to squash the rights of someone else. It doesn't work that way. You have to equally pay homage to the rights of every person in this argument. And if you're one of these real intellectuals who think you score big points by starting off with name calling and going down the line, and I don't care on what side of the argument you're on, guess what? You ain't helping. When it comes down to it, if you want to make progress on this, it comes back to what I've been saying since the start of this year. We have got to learn to start respecting each other again. We have to respect each other on a personal level. Doesn't mean we have to agree with everything, and it certainly doesn't mean we have to play the PC, we have to be politically correct game. It's not about appeasement. It's not about, let's say what feels good, but it is about being respectful enough to have a legitimate conversation with somebody that has a different point of view, listening to what they say, and them listening to what you say, and at the end, with no name calling, with hopefully very little raised voices, both of you come away moved a little bit closer to each other. If not outright, one of you deciding, hey, you know what, I was wrong, I'm with you now. I agree. Sorry. But that also starts with telling the truth. That's why the name of this show is Tap Into the Truth. It's not because everything I tell you is true. I mean, I've made a point of occasionally going with stories that were fabrications just to see who would call me out on it. And I also like to go ahead once again and give props. A lot of the regular listeners caught on right away. It said so. Caught them up in the chat rooms and got emails saying, hey, that story is completely bogus. It's like, that is correct, sir. Thank you for being smart enough to know. Because it's not about following blindly. That's why when I'm signing off of the show, I start out with telling you, don't take my word for it. But definitely don't take their word for it. You've got to look at multiple sources of information, and then you have to be prepared to have the conversation. Same-sex marriage is a conversation topic, and it's one that people are extremely passionate about on both sides. And I get and understand fully both sides of that argument. And somehow I manage to piss off everybody on both sides of that argument when I tell them, hey, you know what? You don't have a right to get married, period, let alone force people to believe it. You're not really fighting for marriage. You're fighting for what the state is going to call a civil union. Come on, people. Doesn't matter. Folks over here, you're worried about two people of the same sex having a ceremony? Why? Your religion informs you that that's a sinful behavior. Okay. When it comes to sinful behavior, what's the bottom line? Oh yeah, when they go before the deity, they have to answer for that sinful behavior. Not you. Now you have to answer for your sinful behavior. And I know sometimes it is said that to see sin and not speak up is in itself a sin. Okay, fine, fair enough. So speak up. Say your piece. Reach out to these people. Because my faith informs me, and I am a Christian, by the way, that as a Christian, we love the sinner. We hate the sin. So we don't have to agree with the lifestyle, with choices, or with the terrible truth of the way you were born. Whatever spin, whatever choice you want to make, I don't want to get sucked down into those details. But in the end, if two people want to get married, they want to have a ceremony, then they should be able to have a ceremony. But ultimately, if they want that ceremony to be recognized, that has to be decided by the state. It's licensed by the state. It's one of the state's rights. The Supreme Court has no jurisdiction. The federal government has no jurisdiction. It's not a federal issue. It's a state issue. Trying to use the 17th Amendment for the Equal Protections Clause is a stretch, a terrible stretch. And again, I've already explained why it's a stretch, because there are no constitutional guarantees. No one has a right, per se, to get married. If they did, you wouldn't have to get a license. If you got a right to do it, they can't make you get a license. Well, what about driving a car? Guess what? Driving a car, operating a motor vehicle, is not a right. Not legally. It's a privilege, and that's why they can license it, and that's why they can make these silly requirements as to what it's going to take for them to recognize that you have the legal right to operate this motor vehicle on their roads, streets, and highways. In this case, you have to meet the stipulations of the state, whatever those stipulations may be. And I would not be opposed to states stiffening requirements so that somebody doesn't jump across a border where they can do something that's not allowed in their home state and then jump back home and expect it to be recognized. Because I do believe that the state should recognize what other states have done. So there should be some contingent for actually being a citizen of the state before being able to do that, and then fulfilling all the requirements, whatever they may be. Now, I'm not against anything like that. So then people tell me, well, then you are against same-sex marriage. No. But I am for states' rights. And I am for the people of the states getting to make those decisions. I am for people making their choices, whether it's based on a religious doctrination or based on personal feelings and emotions, whatever it may be. If you believe that the quality of your life is going to be enhanced by virtue of being married to someone of the same sex and you want to have your